Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting of the Transportation and Circulation Committee to order. Ms. Jackson, can we do the roll call, please?
Yes. Committee Member France?
Here.
Blackerby?
Here.
Hodges?
Here.
Sanford? Here. Rodriguez? Absent. Horn?
Here.
Thank you.
Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair.
I'd like at this time to request any public comment. There are 10 minutes total, 2 minutes for each.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I actually just had some comments regarding your agenda regarding the program updates. I'm just curious to find out if you're only going to be receiving the reports or if you're actually going to be taking any votes or actions on anything, because it doesn't look like you are actually agendized for any actions, and I just wanted to make that public comment. I've actually been looking at a lot of agendas around the city, and what I'm finding is that there are many agendas that are posted by individual advisory groups where actions are taken, and it is actually against the Brown Act, and members who actually take action without public notice actually face a misdemeanor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment, and I'd like to clarify that on the program updates, there will be no action taken, nor any votes taken. Thank you. Appreciate your being a good watchdog. Can we move on to the approval of the minutes for April 25th, 2019?
I'd move approval.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The minutes are approved.
Unfortunately.
And now we would like a report on the City of Santa Barbara non-discrimination and harassment policy, please. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'd like to introduce to you Wendy Levy, who is our Human Resources Director, and we also have Sarah Gorman, who's here, who's our City Clerk. And they will give the presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Hello. Thank you for having me. As you probably know, should I turn this on? Okay.
Just making sure.
Talk into it.
As you probably know, Council decided that all advisory boards and commissions should review our sexual harassment and non-discrimination policy. So what you have in front of you right now is our policy, and you also have a acknowledgement that I would like you to read and then sign that you received a copy and acknowledge that you receive a copy of the policy. So just some highlights. The city has implemented these policies because we want to make sure that our employees, all our staff work in a respectful and dignified environment. And so what that means is that there are some behaviors that are not welcome in the work environment. And so the reason for the policy is to ensure that our staff do adhere to behaviors that are non-discriminatory and non-harassing. So basically, in front of you, you have the policy, and it states that to ensure equal employment opportunities, we do not discriminate based on age, ancestry, color, disability, sex, male or female, and it includes pregnancy and childbirth. gender identity and expression, marital status, medical condition, national origin, race, religious belief, and sexual orientation. We encourage folks, if they encounter these behaviors, to report them to a supervisor, manager, human resources, and we do have the complaint procedure in here as well. So there is the reporting procedure. We also note in the policy that retaliation is prohibited, so anyone who does report these types of behaviors should not be retaliated against. Any questions so far? I know this is pretty basic. You've probably already heard this many times, but I want to make sure just that I go through some things. The definition of discrimination, just in case you're wondering, under the policy is the terms, conditions, and privileges or prerequisites of employment based on actual or perceived related to these special conditions of age, ancestry, color, mental or physical disability, including HIV and AIDS, sex, gender identity, and expression, marital status, medical condition, national origin, race, religious belief, or sexual orientation of employee or job applicant, or based on the employer applicant's association with a person who has or is perceived to have any of these characteristics. The policy also notes some conduct that are some cases that you may notice that should be reported as well. Things like if we advertise positions to encourage or discourage applicants, asking for information in a job application that talks about these protected classes, making employment based on any of those protected classes, providing different pay, different privileges to any of those folks who may be in a protected class, harassing an employee, or retaliating against a person who in good faith makes a complaint about discrimination or harassment. And then the policy also talks about sexual harassment, and just to define that, it's unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal, visual, or physical conduct of a sexual nature. Any questions so far? Again, I know it's pretty basic, and the policy does outline it as well. Just to kind of explain to you some of the conduct that harassment might or you might notice and have to report: epithets, slurs, negative stereotyping, threatening, intimidating, or hostile acts, denigrating jokes, and written or graphic material. You know, if we see some posters on our wall or our screensavers, we want to make sure that they are appropriate for the workplace. What else can I tell you? This policy applies to everyone, including not only staff, but also people we come in contact with if we notice it in the lobby, in our lobbies. So we want to make sure that if we see that behavior interacting with one of our clients or customers, that we also report that behavior. Any questions on that? So if you want to take a few minutes just to review, and then I would ask that all of you kind of review the acknowledgement and just sign that, and then I can grab that.
I have a question. I see that on the signature form, it says, "I have received, read, and understand this document." And I can't do that in 5 minutes or however long you're going to do it. So I'm just wondering if I can send it in or
Absolutely.
bring it in
Absolutely.
later.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you.
All are welcome to do that. Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that comment.
Question. Thanks for this. I'm glad
Oh, sure.
this is
Absolutely.
happening and also coming to advisory boards and commissions. I know a lot of times in a lot of jurisdictions, you know, it's like, okay, employees very clear, and elected officials, it's very clear about the code of conduct, but, you know, we're kind of in that weird space, so I appreciate that. Just two things I noticed, and obviously this is adopted by the city and everything, but it's an iterative process, as we can see from all the different updates that have happened. I know that the staff I know Christy Schmidt doesn't work here anymore, right? So that's one thing. But then just generally, and this would be for future change and in looking at inclusion, I know a lot of organizations are starting to kind of audit their documents and everything. There's a lot of references to he or she, things like that, to just like find and replace and change to they. It's just kind of easier and less clunky. So that'd be your request that in the future,
Great
when
idea.
you do any more edits, to change those to they.
It's a great idea. Thank you for that.
Any other comments or questions? I agree with Ms. Horn that actually, given the care that went into the production of the document, that I'd rather read and review prior to signing. Thank you for that recommendation.
And please feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have any questions on the document or the reporting process or anything like that. I'd be glad to assist that.
Thank you so much for coming.
Sure, absolutely. All right. Thank you.
Can we give it to you now, though?
Yes, you
I don't
can.
plan on doing any harassing or intimidating, so.
Thank you, thank you.
The
Thank you.
report on Cliff Drive Vision Zero and active transportation corridor planning effort, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair and committee members, Derek Bailey is going to give this presentation. I'll just do a little bit of an intro. This process goes back. I need to take you back to the relinquishment of 225, and actually before that. So State Route 225, owned by Caltrans, prior to 2013, was a road that actually used to, going way back, go from Cabrillo on Cabrillo Boulevard all the way to Castillo, turning toward the land side of things to Montecito Street, and then Cliff, and then up Las Positas. And one portion was relinquished in the 90s, and then the latter portion, the one we're going to talk about tonight, is Cliff, that was relinquished in 2013. And then before that, we've received many in my career, many complaints from the Mesa community about Cliff. The size of the road, the 4 lanes, the width of the road, difficult to cross, all sorts of things. The Mesa architects got together in 2011, and Caltrans was a little bit more flexible in the latter portion of owning that road, and actually did a road diet from Meigs down to Loma Alta, and a road diet that was 3 lanes, or a center median and 2 lanes, and then bike lanes were added. And we have been, you're very familiar with our process where we do listening workshops, and we really listen to a neighborhood. Well, I'm here to tell you, we've been listening to this neighborhood for a long time. We've had so many meetings out there. Derek and I have been together. Derek and I have been separately. Other people have been there. We've done workshops. Engineering staff's been out there. We've been at the school. Listen. We have a really good understanding of what the Mesa community is looking for. And so we've been developing under our two banner themes. One is Vision Zero, which you're all familiar with, and then also our active transportation planning grant. We would love to get a grant to do something fabulous there. So the major concerns have been crossing and then the walkability, rideability of the street. Mr. Bailey and his crew have done some really cool designs and imaginations about what we could do, and we've just hired a contract he's going to tell you about to fill in some missing pieces, but it's very, very exciting. What I'll tell you is, if we were in the workshop phases of doing things, we've had our listening, now we're doing our high-level investigations, but we're planning on going back to the Mesa community for a approach workshop, which is, hey, did we get it right? Is this exactly what you're looking for? And this process that Mr. Bailey is going to explain to you is a key element of getting to that approach workshop. Mr. Bailey.
Well, good evening. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me. As Mr. Dayton mentioned, here to talk about the Cliff Drive corridor planning effort. We've already started, as Rob mentioned. A few weeks ago, the City Council approved a contract to study some intersections, and so that's generating some questions in the community. Why are we studying the intersections? What are we studying? One of the things we are looking at is potentially roundabouts at a few intersections as options, just so that we consider everything. But now that the City Council has approved that, we're just trying to get it out there in the community that this process is going on right now. We're doing our homework and what to expect moving forward. So our purpose, identify and ultimately deliver. We really want to deliver community desired changes to Cliff Drive. And Rob walked you through some of the history, the 2011 road diet that Caltrans did while it was still State Route 225, the relinquishment of State Route 225 to the city in 2013. We took a run at getting a grant, a smaller grant, mind you, in 2014, 2015, to extend that road diet because the road diet right now is only east of Meigs. And we heard from people that they really wanted to go west of Meigs, but there's some traffic technical challenges associated with that. But that grant wouldn't have sufficiently funded the changes that need to happen, so that didn't work. Some other things that we've heard, the bicycle master plan identified the need for some strong cycling facilities on Cliff Drive. The Cliff Drive Las Positas roundabout was built in 2016, so that really anchors that corridor. And as well, in early 2020, we expect the Las Positas and Modoc pathway to be under construction. So that's very exciting, and it's all part of the old State Route 225. So once the Modoc and Las Positas path is under construction, we really want to turn our focus to Cliff Drive and try and deliver some improvements to that street as well. So things that we've heard from the community, people like the road diet. We need more crosswalks on Cliff Drive. From City College to Meigs is well over 1.5 miles, I believe, and there's no crosswalks at all. And there's technical reasons for that. Crosswalks on Cliff Drive would be very expensive to install. We can't just put in a painted crosswalk and expect it to improve safety. With the speeds and volumes of traffic and the width of Cliff Drive, the amount of time that it takes to get from one side of Cliff Drive to the other, pedestrians are out in the street for a long time. It really requires more enhanced pedestrian features or pedestrian safety features like pedestrian activated flashers, curb extensions, medians. Those are kind of the bread and butter of the pedestrian safety world. So we also heard from the community, continue the road diet to the west, need better cycling facilities. Even though the road diet was implemented, traffic is still too fast. Santa Barbara City College access at their 2 driveways is challenging. And just overall, Cliff Drive still feels like a highway, an urban highway, but it's definitely one of the widest streets in Santa Barbara compared to all of the downtown neighborhood streets and throughout what many of the neighborhoods in the city have. So funding has been a roadblock. The reason we haven't done anything to date has been funding. And I think we've got a really good opportunity coming up to get some funding, to do some improvements for the community. So what we're working on right now, we're just doing our early homework, but we're creating a corridor plan that addresses safety issues. Safety is a big issue on Cliff Drive. Better mobility for bikes, cyclists, and pedestrians, and improved safety near SBCC. We've hired a consultant to address some challenging intersections. I'm just going to talk about that in a minute. And ultimately, what we're working towards is an active transportation planning grant application in 2020, next summer. So just a little bit about the Active Transportation Program, ATP. It's a very competitive program. It's a statewide program. The collective ask of all the local agencies submitting projects to the program greatly exceeds the amount of funding available. But we think we've got a really good case for a project on Cliff Drive. But in order to make a competitive application next year, a few things that are going to be essential to the project. We have to address safety issues. When the Active Transportation Program applications are scored, they look for safety. When the state invests money in these projects, they want to know that they're going to be saving lives. So we have to demonstrate that whatever we do on Cliff Drive is going to do just that. It has to improve mobility for both cyclists and pedestrians. We think that's a really essential part of the corridor plan, and in order to make a competitive grant application next year. And we have to connect important land uses and facilities. So that means closing a gap in the network, and as well providing access to recreation, coastal access, as well as daily commuting needs. So this is a diagram that just shows some of the existing facilities in the area. So on the right-hand side of the screen, that shows the existing Class 1 paths along the beach and through the harbor area. And then over on the left-hand side of the screen, there's the Auburn Trail. The red shows the future county pathway. And the county just got funding for this section of the path in the last cycle of the Active Transportation Program. We're really excited for them. The blue, that's the Modoc and Las Positas pathway that's going to be under construction in 2020. So you can see kind of these existing facilities, or will soon be existing facilities, really bookend Cliff Drive. And so from a gap closure perspective, we think that this project just makes a lot of sense. And when we do an application next year, we're really going to make the case that this is a gap closure. We've also heard from the community a little bit about Shoreline and MIGS, as it turns into MIGS down around the corner. So we're going to talk about that when we do public outreach and see if there's any interest in perhaps rolling that into the application as well. But ultimately, because we want to have the most competitive grant application possible, some features may or may not make it into the ultimate project that we apply for. Just because it is such a competitive program, we want to make sure that we're in a good position to get some funding. So the planning limits, this is just zoomed in a little bit. Starting at Hendry's Beach in the west and Rancheria in the east, where we just completed the Class 2 bike lane project, and as well just talking to the community about MIGS and Shoreline. The dotted lines just show some of the other gaps that are in the area. There is a small gap through Pershing Park, and as well near Ledbetter Beach. And we expect to work on those projects in the future. So here's some of the land uses that are in the area that we're really trying to knit together. So in the west, there's Hendry's Beach, Elings Park, Monroe School, the Cliff and Meigs intersection. There's shopping on all four quadrants, La Mesa Park, Washington School, the Methodist Church at Santa Cruz, Santa Fe Place where the seniors' housing is. Further east, there's McKinley Elementary. Santa Barbara City College, of course, is a major generator of traffic in the community. The Lower West neighborhood, as well Pershing Park. So as we put our application together, we need and define a project with the community. We want to be really mindful that we're providing good access and really knitting all these land uses together. This is a Vision Zero corridor. So when the city put forth its Vision Zero strategy last year, Cliff Drive was one of the higher corridors in the city for fatal and severe injuries. And just where the collisions are happening in the corridor, this red blob right here, that's around the shopping center. There's been vehicle collisions, pedestrian collisions. There's a lot happening in that area. There's a lot of really closely spaced driveways, and this is, traffic volume-wise, one of the busiest areas along the corridor, as well near SBCC with their 2 driveways as well. Collision severity on Cliff Drive. So this is a measure that we use to explain how severe collisions are as a proportion to all the collisions. So citywide, 3.3% of the collisions result in severe or fatal injuries. On Cliff Drive, it's 5.6%. So it's a higher proportion of collisions result in severe and fatal injury. It's likely because the operating speeds on Cliff Drive are higher. And so when there is a collision, it's more likely that it's a more severe collision. Here's one of the challenging intersections that our consultant is going to help us with. It's the intersection of Mesa Lane, which is on the lower left, and Flora Vista, which is on the upper right. It's an offset intersection. It creates some really non-standard traffic signal sequencing. And this intersection is the reason that the road diet hasn't been extended to the west. The amount of green time that it takes to serve the side streets means that once the green cycles back around to the main street, Cliff Drive, we need multiple lanes to get all the traffic through that intersection. If this was a standard intersection, there wouldn't be as much green time needed for the side streets, and we could likely go down to 1 lane. This is the City College West Campus driveway. This driveway experiences some really heavy pulses of traffic, particularly in between classes. There's a lot of students trying to get on campus and get off campus all at the same time. Excuse me. And this is the Loma Alta intersection, and this photograph also shows the East Campus driveway just a few hundred feet down from the Loma Alta intersection. The spacing of the intersections is awkward, and so we are working with City College right now as well to reimagine how this whole area could function. So one of the questions we're being asked right now in the community is, why are roundabouts being considered for some of these intersections? Generally, roundabouts are safer, and the reason they're safer is because they control the speed. When drivers enter roundabouts, they have to slow down to about 20 miles an hour. So if there is a collision, it's a less severe collision just because the speeds are lower. With a roundabout, one of the things that might be possible is more space for a bike path, sidewalks, street trees, and bus stops. And I'm going to talk in a second about the concept of wide nodes and narrow links and what that means. But roundabouts will just be one of the alternatives that we present to the public. We expect there's going to be traffic signal and roundabouts, and potentially our consultant will come up with something else too. Okay, so what does wide nodes and narrow links mean? So on the top, we have just a figure of two standard intersections. And with Cliff Drive type volumes, if you have two standard intersections, like in front of City College, you need 2 lanes in each direction. And the reason is when the traffic signal turns red and cycles to the side street, and when it turns green again, the green light's not long enough to be sufficient for 1 lane of traffic, essentially. We think that with roundabouts, single lane roundabouts would work, and we would only need 1 lane in each direction. So instead of needing 2 lanes in each direction with traffic signals, we might only need 1 lane in each direction with roundabouts. So very crude drawing, but this is the Loma Alta intersection just with a circle plopped on top of it. But the thickness of the line gives you an idea of one lane in each direction, so just a two-lane roadway, how much pavement there is left over. So the possibility with the roundabout is that we would have this leftover pavement to do other things, like bike paths, wider sidewalks, street trees, and bus stops, important amenities near City College. We also get asked, where will crosswalks be? These are the three most frequently requested locations. So the one on the left is just at the western end of the shopping center, near Camino Calma, Oliver, in that area. The one in the center, that's at Santa Cruz, near the church. That's very frequently requested. And the one on the right, that's near City College. So there's a lot of students that live north of Cliff Drive and walk across the street. There's also bus stops on the north side of Cliff Drive that serve the West Campus in particular as well. But if we're going through the effort of planning and applying for a grant, we should really look at everything that makes sense. So some of these other locations, for example, I talked about the west end of the shopping center at Camino Calma. Well, just down the road at Fellowship, there's a location with bus stops on either side of the road. That might make sense for a crosswalk there. When somebody gets on the bus in the morning, typically when they come back in the evening, they arrive at the bus stop across the street. So there's going to have to be a street crossing involved. So we do want to make this as safe as possible and promote transit as well as possible. What will the crosswalks look like? This is a photograph of the crosswalk that was installed a few years ago at Mackenzie Park, Outer State Street at Calle Paulo, Colorado. Some of the features that were included in this crosswalk, it's a well-lit crosswalk, so safety is improved at night. There's median refuge islands, curb extension on one side of the road, and the pedestrian activated flashers. So this has been a really successful project, and it's not to say that this is what crosswalks on Cliff Drive will look like, but these features work. We've had very good success with them, and some or all of these features could be used at crosswalks on Cliff Drive. So what will the bike path look like? And we're going to spend a little bit of time here talking about this. And this isn't we don't need answers tonight, but I really want to get the community thinking about this, because there's two really distinct types of high quality biking facilities that we want the community to consider. There's a two-way cycle track, it's called, and I'm going to show some illustrations, and a one-way cycle track. And some of the things we need to talk about as we decide on what the community preference is safety. There's different users for the different types of facilities, and as well, which facility is going to provide good connectivity to neighborhoods, schools, and shopping. Whatever facility the community chooses as well, we want it to provide good connectivity to the Las Positas and Modoc Path on the west, and as well a future connection at Pershing Park on the east. So this is what a one-way cycle track looks like. This is a diagram from NACTO, National Association of City Transportation Officials. I got that right. And so basically it's a protected bike lane. There's a barrier between the bike lane and either parking or moving traffic, so it provides that extra element of safety. So there would be one of these types of facilities on either side of the road, one for each direction. Here's a photograph of one down in San Gabriel in the LA area. So you can see they have a little parkway strip with trees. Here, I believe this one's in San Francisco. Something to consider about one-way cycle tracks is the width. And with different users, we really want to make sure there's enough room for passing. And as well, we want to make sure our street sweepers can get in there to make sure that the facilities are well maintained. So just to me, this doesn't look like it would be quite wide enough to suit our needs. And this is another facility. This is in Chicago, so they used flexible bollards and paint. Two-way cycle track, so this would be a two-way pathway, likely on the south side of Cliff Drive. So this is down in San Clemente in Orange County. See the Amtrak line right in the background. So if you ever ride the train down to San Diego, you'll see this out the inland side of the train. Same facility. I think this is a great example of something that could be built on Cliff Drive and could look a lot like this, with a small median in between moving traffic, potentially parking, and the bike facility. There's a two-way cycle track in a more urban condition. Again, another two-way cycle track in an urban condition. And this is in Davis, so they used paint and bollards to create their cycle track. And last rendering, this is in the UK, so if you notice, all the vehicles are on, even the cyclists ride on the opposite side. But this again is something we could do on Cliff Drive. You'll notice the cutouts for side street and driveway access. We could maintain parking. These bulbs at the corner could even be enlarged, and there could be more of them to add places for street trees to be planting, which would provide even more of a separation and a calming effect between moving traffic and the cycle track. The thing we'll have to talk about with the two-way cycle track, though, is safety. Left-turning vehicles from the main line into a side street aren't necessarily looking for cyclists on the cycle track. So as we have these conversations, we're going to have to talk about how to make this safe if this is the preferred facility. So process, summer 2019, where we are right now, we're doing analysis, we're collecting data, we're doing our intersection studies with our consultant, and we're starting to have conversations with MTD and City College. We're doing our homework right now. Fall and winter, later this year, we're going to be presenting alternatives to the community. So we're going to be having some of these conversations, one-way cycle track, two-way cycle track, where do the crosswalks go? Is there anything else we're missing from the community's perspective? By spring of 2019, we need to have a community preferred option. And spring and summer, the ATP application is going to be due early next summer. So by the spring, we'll need to be working on that. 2020, yes. Yes, it's 20. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, community preferred option by spring of 2020. Thank you. By next winter, we'll find out the results, and we're expecting success. So 2021 to 24, it'll take about 3 years to design, and construction 25, 26, which does seem like it's a ways away, but there's a lot of work that'll have to go into this project, and it'll go fast. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd really appreciate your feedback, just how to, what you think preliminarily about the facilities, the process, and moving forward.
Thank you very much. That was very thorough. Is there any discussion? Ms. Horn.
I'm really excited about this. I live on the Mesa, so I've been watching the changes, which have been great so far. I wanted to ask you about the last picture, the two-way cycle track in Great Britain. You said something about places to park, but I don't see any parking in this picture, and I just wondered where was the parking, or did you misspeak them on that?
These little cutouts right here are parking spaces.
Oh.
This rendering just isn't showing anybody parked there, but that is what they're intended for. And we've started playing with some sketches as far as how much width we have to work with on Cliff Drive, and we could do something very similar to this.
Thanks.
I have a clarifying question.
Ms. Sanford?
Okay. With the two-way cycle track, which side of the road did you say that would probably go on? The side closer to the ocean?
It seems to make sense to have it on the south side. we're open. Obviously, we want to talk to the community and hear what they have to say. Some of the facility or the destinations and other facilities that are along this corridor. Hendry's Beach is on the south side. The roundabout was built to accommodate a two-way cycle track on the south side. City College is on the south side. Future connection to Pershing Park is on the south side. The future access to the beachway, however we get down there, is going to be on the south side. So there's a lot of things on the south side that I think we would want to be next to limit the number of crossings that have to happen. But again, we're listening and we're open to what the community has to say.
Chair.
I have a question, which is when do you anticipate the consultants coming up with their design suggestions?
I expect that probably September, October, November we'll have those. They're going to be part of what we show the community. So what I'm envisioning is strip maps that show the different configurations, and then at each intersection, we can show different iterations of what's compatible with what type of facility.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question about the two-way cycle track. So an analog project would be Hollister near Elwood to connect to Elwood School from Pacific Oaks. That project is a little quirky, though, and that one retains bike lanes, Class 2 bike lanes, in addition to Class 4 cycle track. How would this project be similar or different?
Great question. We don't have enough room for a two-way cycle track and bike lanes on the street. So when I mentioned the different users that would be using these facilities, we'd have to consider that. So some of the more experienced cyclists that ride faster and prefer being on a higher speed facility, they might not want to be riding on something like this, so they would be riding in or with traffic. Whereas with a one-way cycle track on either side of the road, they could be built to such a width that I think those type of cyclists would be very comfortable riding in.
Similarly, in terms of looking at this example from the UK, which always gives me some tinge of panic in a UK transportation design. So in the pockets, you mentioned the ability to kind of play with the size of that. How close would you get to sort of a protected turning pocket so that somebody could turn, pause, then merge through the cycle track?
I expect the vehicles would be turning directly from the travel lane. We won't have enough room for dedicated turn pockets. And the challenge with doing that, having dedicated turn pockets, is essentially, for example, on this illustration, this area here would turn into that turn pocket. And because you don't have much separation between the cycle track and the turning pocket, you don't have an opportunity to play with the turning radius at the corner to slow vehicles down. So in effect, you're eliminating a lot of your ability to slow the traffic down going around the corner by doing that.
Yeah, and actually it comes to mind the other analogy or analogous project would be El Colegio. And it'd be worth just like comparing widths for how, and they have, I think, more width to work with for their turning movements for vehicles crossing the cycle track, and probably far less volume too of turning movements. That's it for questions.
Ms. Blackerby.
It was very exciting this whole thing, it makes me feel old because when you go and you put all the history of a project, and I remember every single bit of it. But that's good. You know, it's nice to see this stuff coming to fruition. I've been thinking a lot about two-way cycle tracks lately because we're thinking about it in maybe other parts of town. When it comes to Cliff Drive, you know, it's nice, and we think of a lot about cycle tracks or sometimes bike lanes being like, the use of one is people go in a straight line and they go maybe from point A to point B on that bike path. But on Cliff Drive, there are all those major uses you talked about on the south side, but like, people live on both sides, right? And they go to things on both sides. And so my big concern, I mean, I think right now, because Cliff Drive is functionally kind of a highway still, the idea of current conditions, with a bike lane on either side, making a left turn to get home or whatever, is dicey, right? Thankfully, you do have that center turn lane, but you're really in mixed traffic. This actually is scarier to me if you need to cross with your bike, on your bike, or whatever. Do you have to dismount? Because if you I have a friend who lives on the north side of the street, kind of near via Santa Fe, and she works at City College. And she's like, you know, she could bike or whatever, but she drives every single day. And I'm working on her to take the bus, okay? But again, no crosswalk. We've talked about this, you know, what could happen there. I don't see a safe way where a non-confident cyclist at this point, would be willing to even do the two-way cycle track unless she was starting at Hendry's and getting off at City College, right? Because those entry and exit points for a cycle track, that's like what it all comes down to for me. If you're just going like from end to end, it's safe, but people don't always do that. So what do they do in other places? Because especially with all those driveways and everything, like, you know, there's trip generators along the way. So how does that get worked out generally in things like this? And obviously we have to figure it out here.
That's a great question. In terms of users, like say we're talking about a two-way cycle track on the south side of Cliff Drive, and there's users on the north side of Cliff Drive. I think that makes the frequency of crosswalks that much more important. There's no really good way to provide cyclists with a way to ride to the north side of the road. So less confident cyclists will have to use a crosswalk. So that makes the frequency of the crosswalks more important. The driveways around the shopping center concern me a lot. Because of the spacing of them, how busy they are. Drivers, especially if they're turning left into those driveways on the south side of Cliff Drive, kind of across from the shopping center, they're looking at traffic because it's busy. So they might not be looking for somebody on the cycle track on the side of the road. So we're going to have to talk about how to address safety in front of the shopping center. There's already safety issues in front of the shopping center that we should be talking about how to address, but how best to knit a high-quality cycling facility into that. And what's most compatible, one-way or two-way cycle track?
And honestly, even if there weren't driveway conflicts, you still got to get the bike. How does the bike cross the road? Right. We should ask the chicken. Why did they cross the road? But how did they cross the road safely? And then, so I mean, that's my big thing. I think we could have like an incredible project and streetscape. I just don't know what it looks like. And, you know, when we look something like this, we don't want to create, when we go down to fewer lanes, which I'm all for, if you have something like this where there's not a turning pocket, you've got people, I think you create more vision zero problems where you're like, okay, I'm stopping so I can turn, waiting for cross traffic to go, and then I'm turning into my driveway or whatever. You don't want to like create more problems, right? If you go down to that, which is what I would see if these people, if this wasn't wonky British backwards stuff here, they'd be turning, but they'd been waiting for coming, and then everyone would pile up behind them. So, and I appreciate, and I know that you're doing this already, but taking a look at, bus stops and what could we do there. People see this as a place to park a car. I see a bus pocket if you break it out a little more, right? So separating all of those users, I think, is crucial as long as they have a clear way to get from one side to the other.
Just a point of clarification. There would definitely be a center turn lane. Sorry if I misled you that there is not room for a center turn lane. Our perspective, that's an essential feature needed on Cliff Drive for safety. Something to think about on Cliff Drive is if this happens, what's traffic going to feel like? And I think everybody right now, when they equate trying to cross Cliff Drive, they're thinking, it's a 64-foot wide street. Traffic is going 40s, low 40s to high 40s, maybe even beyond. And it's busy. It's uncomfortable. If we do something like this, traffic could feel pretty radically different. So it's just something to think about is in terms of what are appropriate treatments to get people across the street. We're not dealing with quite the same traffic conditions as we are right now. Definitely have to be safe, but just something to think about is we could be creating, between really activating the street with bicycle and pedestrian facilities, perhaps more street trees. It could feel a lot different and more calm.
Yeah, I think it will. Just thinking about volumes, and I don't know what the volume. I knew what the volumes were in 2013 during relinquishment, but I don't know what they are now. I don't know if they've changed much, but that's still, if you can't find a gap,
Right.
And if you're being fed by roundabouts, you can never get a gap to turn. But yeah, I guarantee literally anything we do will make it safer and more comfy. But yeah.
I just want to return to Mr. Francis' comment because on Las Positas, the importance of having a left turn pocket to prevent accidents is a change that is going to be implemented in this summer.
Yes. Oh, yes, up near McCaw. Yep.
And so,
in July.
Don't we have the same need on Cliff?
We do. Yes, and that was my point of clarification. I apologize. Is a center left turn lane is an essential feature that we want to design into this project.
Are there any further questions or comments? Yes, Ms. Horn.
I just have one thing, which is it seems to me like the traffic is much, much more in the last year or so. And I'm just wondering if there's been a recent counting on Cliff Drive.
Yes, we did do a pretty thorough set of counts in April and May. And we haven't gone back and compared them to what we've had since the relinquishment happened. We did some studies early on when the relinquishment happened, but that'll be interesting to see if there is any difference.
Is it an all-day thing, or is it like an hour, in rush hour, an hour? I mean, what are the counts? When are they taken?
They're all day. So our new way of counting is we count 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. So it's usually a 13-hour window. So if there is any interesting peaks that happen during the day, particularly when you have land uses like City College, where you're dealing with irregular class schedules and students that may not roll out of bed first thing in the morning, it is important to get all-day counts.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Mr. France.
Love the report. My one question, though, is, are there Steve Sisler Photoshop images coming. We love those from Las Positas.
We do, yes. That's a great suggestion. I think that'll make for a successful project.
But actually, real quickly, just to follow up on Ms. Blackerby's question, my question is, if you're in thinking about the crosswalks, and I know it's kind of it's like different forms of math, right? Or the box turn so if you had a separate two-way separated cycle track, have you thought, or could you even kind of integrate like a box turn into those?
Yes.
Or would they be forced like dismount and become a pedestrian?
Yep, definitely. There'd be enough space between the cycle track and the traffic lane that you could set something like that up.
Great.
So that would be a possibility.
Further questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a few comments.
Mrs. Sanford?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I just have a few comments. I do think this project reminds me a lot of the bike path that I guess it was like a cycle track. It was kind of an ambiguous cycle track or bike path that they worked on over in the Elwood neighborhood, also a highly residential area. And they ended up trying to design these like pockets where cars could just pause when they made their turn before, crossing the cyclist or the active lane there. So, I think it's an interesting parallel, and I'm sure your consultant will talk all about that. These are more like kind of just detail stuff, but the section where SBCC has that entrance area that you were considering a roundabout, I think that would be a really interesting place to maybe work with the campus to see if they would like further enhance it with like some sort of pavement treatment where, perhaps you could like do some cobblestones there or just something that would really kind of slow the student drivers down as they entered the roundabout. And since it is kind of the gateway to SBCC, it'd be great if they would consider just, really kind of making that a very experiential kind of place where people would pause. And then, just thinking, kind of taking a step back and thinking about this corridor, it just really strikes me that it does feel like a highway. And a lot of that has to do with the design of the road, but it also just has to do with like the land use. And so on kind of a micro scale, I'd love if, maybe this won't be part of an ATP grant, but, if during your conversations with the Mesa residents, it'd be really fun to just kind of think even, taking a step back, like what else could you do to activate it, even besides like just the two-way cycle track, like parklets and, just pausing areas, dog parks, water fountains, just the kind of, attractions that get people to come out and walk around and things like that. And then on like more of kind of a macro scale, I just think a lot about this area and all the students who drive to SBCC and how important in the long term housing will really be there. And so just some food for thought.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. Ms. Horn?
She just reminded me that the Mesa architects have been working on ideas for all these years, and I've seen slides of their developments of like having a median with its landscaped and different things like that. So I would just recommend that the consultants or staff talk to them about what they've done so far, just to share ideas.
Further questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, a comment.
Mr. France?
So, in a perfect world, since we don't have cycle tracks yet in the city of Santa Barbara, block faces that don't have a number of driveways or any could be the first. So especially Santa Barbara seems to be an island where we don't know. We all seem to travel places, but we don't seem to learn anything from anywhere else. So if we didn't see it here, we just can't compute. But it'd be really lovely to see a street like State be a precursor to perhaps a more ambitious cycle track project like this. Just something that is perhaps more doable without a gigantic ATP project, and would really help the community know what it is, since again we don't have that type of treatment. This is an amazing project, and I think that I love the motto that seemed to come out of this of expect success. This has been brewing for years with for probably 2 or 3 decades at least with the Mesa architects and residents, and I think this is a fabulous start to the process. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, just want to comment on Committee Member France's comment on State Street. We're actually going to do a pop-up cycle track on State Street. We're not sure exactly when it's going to be. We're going to try to time it in coordination with Bike Share, which Jessica Grant's going to tell you about in the updates. One of the things that's really interesting that you could help us with is cycle track is one of those words where I'm not sure anyone really understands what it is. You know, the other one we struggle with is bicycle boulevards. We just really need to figure out a way to name these things that people can get. You know, I don't know, bike promenade, you know, for State Street. Maybe, you know, something that would actually engender a little bit more readily what it actually means. But that's a great comment, and we want to do that pop-up. We're excited about it. The invitation will be come on downtown and sign up for Bike Share and try it out right on State Street.
Rob, or can I?
Ms. Sanford, yes.
Thank you. The term that the California Bicycle Coalition has like officially endorsed in the state of California for cycle tracks is protected bike lane. I think it does imply a little more what it does, the sense that like it gives protection. I also think it's becoming a little outdated with like new technology and new wheeled devices in the bike lane. So, you know, it's still something I think we can all kind of chew on and think about. And then I really admire Berkeley for kind of, and I really admire places that brand their bicycle boulevards. I think I once suggested to Peter like beachways, but then he was like, people will think they lead to the beach. And I was like, well, kind of they all do. So
Nice.
But yeah, I really love the idea of branding them and not necessarily like even implying what they do in the name, but you know, like branding them as part of an experience that people, you know, like for example, like Portland doesn't call their closed streets events ciclovias, they call them Sunday streets. And it's just a step, Sunday parkways, which is kind of like a step back from transportation and more of like an experience. And I just wanted to mention, like, I know it's kind of maybe random to talk about land use and the Transportation Committee, but the reason it seems so important to me is that I think land use and just the fact that people choose to drive on Cliff instead of, you know, opting to take softer modes and walking and biking has a lot to do with, like, maybe some of those higher collision rates we see. And when I think about people making those, like, left turns and having to figure out, and the kind of webby situation we're going to have to be in, figuring out how to get cars into those neighborhoods, the better solution would be just not having to get as many cars into those neighborhoods. And so, you know, tying a big infrastructure investment like this back to, you know, how students are traveling and why students have to have cars and, you know, why residents, you know, can or cannot, you know, hop on another mode. Just, I don't know, I feel like that's kind of a interrelated conversation that the Mesa seems ready to have. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Sanford. Any other comments? Mr. France.
Sorry, one last comment. I think it'd be interesting to think about electric bikes for design speeds in any configuration. My guess is that more electric bikes will be used, especially in that neighborhood, especially 5 years from now.
I like two-way protected bike lane because the word protection resonates with the notion of safety and personal safety, and the two-way would allow people to know that it goes in both directions. When I first heard the term cyclotrack, I thought of a velodrome.
Yep.
Thank you so much for your presentation. If there are no further questions or comments, thank you so much. If there's no further comment, then we will move on to the program updates, please.
Jessica Grant will give you the updates.
Good evening, committee members. I wanted to first discuss the Measure A Cycle 4 outcome, and we received funding for 3 of the 7 grant applications we submitted. And the ones that we received funding for, 2 were planning-related grants. The first one being the Lacumba Junior High multi-use path. So looking at where the future Las Positas Modoc multi-use path is, which is the 2.6 mile stretch. But if we were to continue going along Modoc towards Lacumba Junior High, this multi-use path in concept would begin at the Las Positas Modoc intersection and then go all the way to the Modoc Mission intersection. So more to come. We have funding now to explore the concept a little bit further, and the funding is available this coming fiscal year, July 1st. So fantastic. And the second planning-related grant is the Castillo Street undercrossing under the freeway, and we know how much of a barrier it is to navigate for active transportation users under the freeway. And so it's really to look at better ways for the way the approaches are to the intersection and as you navigate under to get to the primary destinations of City College and the beach, and then also the connection back to downtown. The funding for that one will be available next year in fiscal year 21. The other one, the last one that we received funding for, is a design and construction grant funding for the Santa Barbara Street and Nalli intersection. So that is in the heart of the city's funk zone and one of the main intersections to get into the funk zone. And the intersection's at a skew, and trying to standardize that, make it an all-way stop, and put in some curb extensions as well to decrease the crossing distance at that intersection. So, and funding for that one will be available in FY20. These projects will be going to City Council in a couple weeks, I believe July 16th, for the cooperative agreement between the city and SBCAG. So that's it with those. And the next item is bike share. So as you know, in April of 2019, we council approved the share mobility ordinance amendments, and with that came the request to move forward with a bike share program. And in early June, we sent out requests for applications to solicit for potential operators for bike share programs. We have received a lot of just initial interest. The application period closes, at the end of July. And hopefully soon after we will have interviews of the probably top 3 applications, and hopefully bike share will come to fruition very soon thereafter. And visions.
Can you ask questions about these things?
Sure.
So I saw the ordinance and all that, and it's great. We have one. A lot of vague stuff in there, though, which I'm sure is why you've been able to move so quickly. But is it, obviously the request for, what was it? AQP something?
At request, it's a new terminology. I'm
Applications.
used to the world of request for proposals,
Right.
but in this, because at the end of the day, it is an application that is approved at the city, so it's a request for applications.
Got it. Could we see that? Like what was sent out to the world? Just
Sure.
So we know what.
Sure,
what
I
you're
would be happy
getting
to.
back.
Yes.
I don't think the ordinance limited the number of vendors. Did it?
No, it did not.
Okay. Is there a plan
I think
on that,
the
or just see how it
ideal,
goes?
the initial, it's just a pilot program, and the period that we had the pilot program for is for 3 years. I think ideally we would move forward with one operator,
Got it. Okay.
a pilot.
Yeah, I think it's just good. Whatever. I mean, this has been a long time coming, so I'm just curious of like what's out there, and then obviously we'll find out what,
Right.
and I'm assuming in the RFA it says how the selection process, because normally how these things fall apart, right? I mean, usually with scooters, but when the city isn't clear enough about how these decisions will be made, then the vendors are up in arms about it. I'm assuming that's a thing that happens. I've read articles. So I was just curious about that, but it's good to know. But I'd love to see what actually went out to the companies.
And then a special thanks for Sam Footner, who's in our audience. He's our mobility coordinator, and he worked really hard on the proposal and application and getting it all out. So we thank him for his hard work.
Ms. Sanford?
Yeah, I have a clarifying question. So you are going to take multiple vendors in the pilot period, or by the end of the pilot period, or at the end, you'll conclude and like pick one vendor?
This is a great question, Committee Member Sanford. So we're just truly trying to figure out exactly what we're looking for, and I don't think we know. Mm-hmm. There's so many different variations to this. And if we were putting this out a couple of years ago, we would have said, "Oh, for sure we don't want dockless," or for sure we don't want docked. And I think now there's even more ambiguity about which one we want, because docked is neater and the other one's not. And the council is really concerned about having the look of what it looks like to have bikes everywhere. And then there was discussion in the council about, is it electric? Is it not electric? There's nice things about electric, because then if they have to be recharged, then the companies have to clean them up. They have to charge them and then put them back out. So it means that they're touching the bikes more often. So multiple vendors, one vendor. We really want to see what we get in and what the proposals are to meet the objectives that are in the RFA that we'll send you, and see what is the best way to go. We really don't know, and we don't want to prejudge what we're going to see. And every time we go to a conference or talk to a vendor, there's a new thing that we didn't know even existed, last year. And so we'll see what we get. But we do want to meet those objectives, some of them which that I mentioned that the council's interested in. They want to keep them off the sidewalks. From riding on the sidewalks. They want to make sure that there's not as much clutter. They want to make sure there's responsibility to cleaning them up, making sure that they're safe and in working order at all times, those type of things. And then again, there was the ambiguity about electric and not.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just in terms of process then, does that mean that the city council is going, like, because I attended the Side City Council, will they rank priorities and then vet the application to see which ones fit those? Just because I work in the industry, and I know that, and I work on a lot of RFPs, and I know that you can often like cater a program even after something's been submitted, like, deployment location change and lots of points change. So I wonder how that conversation between the city and applicants will go in terms of just conveying, like, well, this is what we're looking for. Like, is there kind of like a selection committee that will be vetting stuff?
We've set the parameters and the objectives, and so the council set those. Staff will determine the best way to go. Yes, I completely agree with you. There should be a conversation. It's a dialogue about, what can you do, and then it's just like when you're shopping. You want to make sure you get the best deal, you want to get the best service, and the best return on investment for the community. And, there's cost to consider. It'd be great if there's no costs. So there's all these things that we will be in dialogue with, and that'll be a staff decision. And, based on what we see, maybe we need to do more than just staff decision. But we want to see what we get first to understand what that looks like. We're really curious.
Yeah, and it's like a really interesting time where, like, you have kind of seen the revolution from, like, dockless in the 30s to like docked, undocked, most cities are on the undocked place, but like I think docked in stations are kind of like a mix of both. They're probably a good, healthy environment for shared mobility.
One other question. Is there already, so I know it's a staff decision, but is there already a scoring rubric developed, or that's just sort of my thing of like, okay, you said, let's see what we get. Mm-hmm. But when you see what you get, I assume you know the things that are important to you based on what council said, but are there, like, is there the rubric already that you're like just waiting to then have people score and see what happens?
Yes, that is part of the request for application package.
Right.
In
they
there.
can score themselves like an ATP grant. Perfect.
Okay.
Further questions or comments?
I don't think that any council members actually mentioned, I don't remember if they mentioned this, but I'm assuming you guys did a pretty thorough process on it, but were there like inclusions for like low-income fare programs or like opportunity areas that would be like given extra attention in addition to like the funk zone and the core?
Yes.
Okay,
That,
great.
Okay, moving on to
please
the
continue with the
Vision
updates.
Zero. On the engineering front, coming soon this summer, you'll see the Las Positas Road Safety Restriping Project take place, as well as the East Cabrillo Safety Striping Project as well. East Cabrillo is anticipated to go first, and followed by Las Positas. And as soon as I know hard dates, we can let you know. And on the more education front for our programming under Vision Zero, we've been working with a consultant and hopefully under contract soon for we originally were looking at the campaign outreach strategy, and now we're at the phase to start building our website and logo, and just so we could have the message, because now when you go to our city's website, there really, other than the adoption of the strategy, there isn't a Vision Zero presence, and so we want to make sure that we get that coming online in the next few months. And we've also been working with the police department. We've had several meetings with the enforcement staff and trying to figure out a strategy for the behaviors patterns that we're seeing on some of the high priority corridors, and then what does that look like on the boots on the ground for enforcement to try to limit those behaviors. So those discussions are still ongoing as well. And I think that's it for Vision Zero for right now. And then the next update is just the MTD Waterfront Shuttle, the quarterly report that was from January to March. We included with your staff report package. Is there anything, Ms. Blackerby, that you would like to highlight, or is it just for everybody's records?
Yeah, nothing.
Okay. And then per your the TCC's request, this is also being shared with the Downtown Parking Committee as well, the quarterly reports.
Mr. France?
I just have a question or a thought. It'd be interesting to see, the downtown waterfront shuttle is certainly tied in with the vitality of state. It'd be interesting to look at the ridership and riders per hour and whatnot, along with, I don't know the level of granularity. We can look at like sales tax revenues. But it's just a thought. Basically, like, are people coming there? How are they getting there? And how can we, play with that mode shift?
In line with that question, it's just watching the continual decline over time over the last 5 years or so. I'm just wondering if there's theories or as to what are the factors contributing to the loss of ridership over time.
That's something that I will bring back and share with the MTD representatives.
Thank you.
Another cool thing, and I don't know if Ms. Blackerby wanted to say more about it, because MTD was very helpful and instrumental in it, but when we implemented the Funk Zone route change, so now the shuttle is going through the Funk Zone in the northbound direction, turning right on Mason, right near the California, and then left on Anacapa across the tracks, and left on Nalli. The stop is actually at Nalli and Anacapa, and then continuing up State Street again. So, hey, in terms of ridership, wouldn't it be great to see an increase in ridership because of that change? So we're going to be watching that carefully with MTD, but we're very thankful for our partners at MTD for making that happen.
And it was nice to see that the electric buses are all online and in action. That's wonderful.
Still electric. New. Yes. Always electric.
Always electric.
Yep.
All right.
Are there any further questions or comments? Then
I'll just make a quick comment. I'm just really happy with the new MTD bus stop, like right in front of Oriana. It's just like makes so much sense. Probably could have done it, a long time ago, but I'm pretty happy about that.
thank you, Ms. Sanford. Ms. Horn?
While we're giving accolades here, I'd just like to add that the new color designs are just great. Really love the updated modern color combination on the. It makes such a difference. So.
Thank you. If there are no further questions or comments, then I declare this meeting adjourned.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members.
Thank you.